Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
I'm Bob Chester, President of the Historical Society, and I really want to thank you all for coming. Sally is the last of the line. This is it. The last manned lighthouse in the United States was Boston Light, and Sally's the last keeper. So this is it's going to be a fantastic presentation, I'm sure. And if you have cell phones, please turn them off. Exits each side to the rear. Bathrooms are here, and has a special thing. If you want to join the Historical Society, you get $5 off, $25 for a single membership. You get it for $20. You can see Martha; she'll sign it, and you can become a member. There's Martha. Jeannie at the back puts these all on. She does a fantastic job. Go to Scituate Historical Society.org. Our website, and you can actually see the progress on Scituate Light, which now is topless. Believe it or not. We're not sure. Well, hopefully next Tuesday we'll get an idea of when it's going to be done. We're hoping Labor Day. It's very interesting to watch the process, because when the full moon comes, everyone gets on the beach and tries to put the moon up on top. It's a lot of photos. We also, besides this, go to our website and find out future talks. We do full moon tours up Lawson Tower. You can see the sunset, the moon come up, and if it's a nice night, we have the astronomy group there with their big telescopes. And also on a good night, you can actually see the monument at Provincetown with the naked eye. It's pretty cool. It's 123 steps, which is really a good workout. We actually have a couple of clock minders here. Donna, Stephen. If anyone wants to help.
And we take you up to the clock.
And you go way up to the clock, yes. So with no further ado, here's Sally.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out to hear about Boston Light. 307 years of service. And my husband is here, Jay Thompson. And we and
You'll be able to hear me without a mic.
Jay and I met in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. I've been in, that's a volunteer component of the Coast Guard. I've been in for 47 years, and Jay's been in for 36, and we met. And so there's a love story that's going to unfold through this presentation. And when I went on the payroll with the Coast Guard in 2003, I wear two hats now. So when I have the bonnet on, I'm on the payroll. When I'm on the blue uniform, I'm doing it volunteer. And we have another auxiliarist with us, Darcy, in the back of the room. Jay and I have written 3 books, and they're on the back table, just to let you know. And if you're interested in purchasing them, Darcy will take care of you. So with that, we're looking at a fabulous photo of Boston Light. It's 1.5 acres at high tide and 3.5 at low tide. And with the rising sea, it's getting smaller. So now we'll move on to the next slide, where we show the buildings that are on the island. And of course, the tower is front and center. And then down to the right is a cistern building. A cistern is a container that holds water. And the reason why the roof is so big is so it can maximize getting water, rain, sleet, whatever. And we'll keep you in suspense as to what that water was used for. Then there's a little building in front of the tower. That's the fog signal building. As you move toward Boston, do you see Winthrop with sewage treatment? We call them dinosaur eggs. So as we move to that end, you'll notice on the left we have the oil house. It's a little white house. Some people asked, "Oh, was that the outhouse?" No, that was for flammables, the oils, paints, things like that, and we still use it for that. And then we come to the Keeper's house. The Keeper's house is where I used to live 5.5 months. And the last year I was able to be out there for that was in 2018. And I think that I get used to living on the mainland after all those years. I'm not. I think this is home. That's my real home. And the next one is the boathouse. And the date on that is 1899. That is the newest boathouse, the newest building on the island, because the original one was washed off the pier with the Portland storm of 1898. And as you can see, that it's a rocky island with some grass.
Now it's mostly weeds.
Yeah, right now it's weed, yeah. So we're going to be looking at the light station when it was established in 1716, and many people don't realize there were also a fog signal station, which was established in 1719. And this is a map. It's not a chart. You would not want to use this to take a boat to navigate into the inner harbor. If you notice the red dot, that's the route that when the colony of Boston was being settled, and they left from Britain, sailing across 3,000 miles to come over to where we are, with the town of Hull, with the elbow, with the gray piece there, and Little Brewster Island, just a mile away. So after sailing 3,000 miles, they had to take a hard right rudder around Boston Light. And the question is, well, why wasn't it put on Allerton Hill, or Point Allerton Hill, in Hull? Well, that was one of the choices. It was, well, do we put it on an island or do we put it on the mainland? If they put it on the mainland and the shipwreck shipped, there was the opportunity to save the cargo, and notice the order here. The cargo, salvage the ship, and then maybe the people. When it followed on the ledges, Graves Ledges and in the Brewster Islands, the ship would crack open like an eggshell, and the cargo would go into the sea, and the people would die, and the ship would get lost. Well, lost, yes, gone away. And that's why they put it on Little Brewster Island, because they had to do that hard right rudder. And then, by taking that route, they had to meander between 3 islands, Levels, Georges, and Gallows. And when they had the engines that were put in ships in the mid-1800s, they said, hey, no good here.
The narrows is too narrow!
And that's when they defined the word Massachusetts Bay. That's actually Broad Sound of Nahant and Winthrop. That was dredged. So when that was finished, in 1904, the Graves Light was being built, and they got a bigger light than we did. So Graves Light is now just off the map, and Boston Light is inward, and we'll tell you a little story about the second order lens and the first order lens. That's another story that will unfold.
The other little interesting piece of trivia is between 1880 and 1900, they dredged and blasted the channels here, and they were back out a few years ago doing the same thing to take care of the Panama ships that are coming in.
So they're dredging it again, and all the way into what we call the reserve channel. It's where the ships come in, the cruise ships and what have you. So they'll be just finishing that up this year. What goes around comes around. So look at the colors. We've got white, green, and gray. The green are the ones that are within the Boston Harbor Islands National and State Park. Did you know that the harbor is a state park, in a national park? Both? Okay. And the partners, there's 13 partners, and the superintendent of the park needs to come into consensus with all those 13 partners as to decide who gets what priority on the islands for people to visit and what have you. So it was an interesting law that came into place in 1996. And it took a few years to get up and running for tours to start out of Boston Light. And we did a pilot run in 1999, but the real year was 2000 when it went into full swing. So all the green was within the park. If you'll notice, Boston Light is green. So that's going to fill out even more of a story that's going to unfold. So here we go. This is a rendition of what one of the artists put in what they thought.
Yeah, the artist definitely took a little bit of artist license. There were no trees there.
Well, at least tall trees, because it's ledge. There's so little dirt on the island where those roots would have stuck in is questionable. And whether the house was that grand or not. But what we do know is in appropriate location is where the tower is and the pier that's coming off the slide to the left. And as you notice, it's a small island there too. And now we get into the fog signal story. The first keeper, his name was George Worthylake. He went out there with his family. And did you know that we have coast pilots or pilots that have to be on board the big ships when they come into the harbor? Okay, they're called pilots. And it just so happened that both Worthylake and the keeper that brought the cannon there were also pilots, and so they got to moonlight because they didn't get a whole lot of money. So Worthylake would continue doing his piloting duties, but he also was raising sheep. And one of the islands that's really close by that you can walk across at low tide is Great Booster Island. And his sheep, a storm came up and 54 sheep got washed off to sea. And Worthylake asked the provincial government if he could get reimbursed or be given more sheep, and they said no. So that was big. That was food. That was that they could sell the wool, what have you. So it was tough living out there, and it really got tough when he was only there going into his third year, and he drowned with his wife, one of his daughters, a slave, and a friend. So then the second keeper came on board. He was just an interim until they hired somebody else. He only lasted 2 days, and he drowned.
He wouldn't have been counted except for the fact that he drowned.
So then the next one that came, his name was Hayes. And because he was a ship's captain, he knew that when you're out on the sea and you can't see your hand in front of your face, that you want to see if there's other ships out there. And what they do is they would fire off black powder for a boom, and they would listen. So if they heard a boom, they'd go, oh my, that's close. Drop sail, change course. But if it was like a boom, they could just continue on their merry little way. Well, Hayes was listening to these ships that were signaling, and he requested a great gun to answer ships in the fog, and this is what he got. And it's what we call a shot-out cannon. If they continue to use it as a weapon, whoever was firing it off would probably die because the fatigued metal would just blow up. And the cannon is the oldest Coast Guard artifact in the country, and it's still on the island. And we're going to be talking about the Revolutionary War, and we'll come back and visit this at that time. And we had a restoration project of $1.1 million for the island back in 2014. And one of the things that Jay and I pondered about when we were writing our first book, Boston Light Historical Perspective, is that it took a long time to build the initial tower. However, when it was rebuilt after the Revolutionary War in 1783, it was a fraction of that time. So we said, we wondered if the initial foundation was still there.
As reported by some.
And sure enough it is, and this shows it. If you look below where it says 1716, do you see how some of the granite stones are very irregular? And then you move up to where it says 1783, they become much more, finished. In uniform. And what I was looking for while the contractors are working is what those lower stones look like. And some of them were cherry red, bright cherry red. And so I said, hey, what in New England could you get cherry red granite? And they said, you can't. It came under pressure. Well, what would be under pressure? The blowing up of the tower by the British when they evacuated back in 1716.
Yes, 76.
Oh, 76, sorry. And then the lower...
Took a little while to get rid of them, but we did.
So the tower is 7.5 feet thick at the bottom, 2.5 feet thick at the top. And that's how they made something conical back in those days. So the finished part on the outside was the granite blocks. Behind that is rubble stone. So it's referred to as a rubble stone tower. Well, what is rubble stone? Well, there it is, folks. Where did they get those stones? Well, probably from the islands, maybe even from Little Brewster Island, from Maine, from Vermont. But can you imagine what 7.5 feet thick is? And then the narrowing of it. So we think this story is pretty significant in the history.
This arrangement that you see here, they put the stucco finish on the tower to keep the water out. Well, there was a spot that the water got in, and what it did is it bulged, so the contractor formed a special piece of steel to hold the rest of the tower up. And they did a jigsaw puzzle. They first marked it off with keel, and then they marked it off with ink, so each piece could go back exactly where it came from.
And we were living on the island, and there were 6 camping out literally on the island. And then 6 more would come up during the day. And my gosh, it wasn't tranquil.
But we had a tin worker that did the copper, and he couldn't get any apprentices. The work was absolutely wonderful.
All right, so now we go to 1830. This is a pretty good rendition of the island, and the tower is at the, did you know Boston Harbor Islands National Park, what made it so significant? It's the only area on the North American continent where we have drumlins, so many of them. And a drumlin is of the shape of an upside down spoon, and that would make it so special. And this is a drumlin. We live on it. And the highest part is where they put the tower. And then to the left, you see a pile of rocks. That's still there. The crevice is just a little bit more. And then you'll see the keeper's house, and that's a good location for it. We think that's good. And then we have someone doing a fishing down the bottom left. Do you know what the 2 exports were for Britain? Number 1 were the trees. The king needed the wooden trees, wood, to build ships for the Navy. After they cut them all down on their little island, or big island, they headed west. And so that's why the trees belong to the king. And if anybody swiped a tree, they'd be in deep doo-doo. And the second thing was cod. And so we have a representation of our cod fishermen. We had that fog signal horn until 1851. It was replaced by a bell. This bell is on the island. It's not the one that was there from 51 to 56, or whatever, with the date 72.
Yeah.
But we know it came from Boston Harbor. But can you imagine driving off that cannon for all those years, from 1719 to 1851? How old was the children that were taught how to fire off that cannon? Because it would be something that would be done 24 hours a day if there was 2 weeks of fog, solid fog, which was not unusual back then.
And it's the technology in the middle of the 19th century that brought the assistant keepers into play, the mechanisms to ring the fog bell and to take and have the alternating characteristics of the lamp was more than they could palm off on the keeper and his family.
And in 1858, 59, the lens at the top of the tower right now is 103 years old. It is 9 feet tall, made up of 336 individual prisms weighing 4,000 pounds of glass and brass, and it's still flashing as it did when it was first lit in 1859. It's a real treasure.
One of the reasons that we believe that we didn't get a first order lens is the tower was already there. They had to take and raise the tower to take and put the mechanism in for the lantern, or for the lens, and we had a lampist believe that they, as well as jacking up the height of it, that this was the lantern that preceded the installation of the lens. So if they put a bigger lens in, it wouldn't have fit.
Yeah, so they were using the initial lens, what we call the lens room, the blasted area itself. Oh, Jay, just hold that back. The question that people say is, especially if you live in Hull, for some reason, I can't say, I think I know what the reason is. The light's been going out on an average of every 3 to 4 weeks. And the Coast Guard goes up there and reactivates it. And when the light goes out, the big one, we have backup lights. Jay, you can point to, they're 180 degrees apart. And so if you're staying in the channel, you're not going to see both of them at the same time. And they're LED lights. Now the lens that you're looking at puts out a 2 million candle power of light. It's very, very bright. The backup lights, the big ones, it can be seen 27 miles out to sea. With the backup light, it's only 7. And we have a story about 27 miles that you can see it. It has to do with the curvature of the earth and with the ship's helmets, how high up off the water it is. And one of the stories I like to talk about is Edward O. Snow, Flying Santa. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. How many people went to this presentation on it a few years ago?
So,
you were the flying elf.
oh yeah, so I got to be an elf one time. So did Dolly. And so we were coming up from the Cape. It was a 14-hour day. And we were flying up to the Hampskin airfield. And as we were coming up the coast, we were inland. We were like over by Worcester. And I looked out the starboard window. Oh, that's the right. And I saw something flashing every 10 seconds. So I said to the pilot, "Is that what I think it is?" And he said, "Yes." So the only thing that's limiting it to the 27 miles is the height of the ship's helm area. Because I saw it all the way from Worcester. I wanted to say, hey, keep on going west. How far can we continuously do that? And where did the assistant keepers live? The first photographs that we have is the one on the left, and that is dated 1875. And this was taken from, it was not a professional photographer, which is interesting.
It was a family photo album.
It was a family photo album. And the woman who donated it to Boston Light is Jane Holbrook Jewell. And she is a cousin of Harold Holbrook. Small world, isn't it? So back in about 1999, she contacted the keeper at the time and said, you know, I have this photo album and I'd like to donate it to Boston Light. So the keeper met her on the mainland and took it. And then when I became keeper, I got the photo album. And I still have it in my possession. And if you notice, there's white paint laying on the ground. Well, it's windy out at Boston Light. If you don't like the wind, don't go out to Boston Light. And so if they were trying to dry their clothes, or in this case, the way that they kept their whites white was by the sun. And if they put it on a clothesline for the day, they would have ended up in the water. So they put them on the ground. And there's a picture of a little girl and then an adult male sitting on a rock. The house that I was living in, when I was in the kitchen, up on my tippy toes, looking out the window, I could see that rock. So that house was not built until 1884. And a good look at that keeper's house. At that time, there was a principal keeper and an assistant. The principal keeper would be the one that's closest to us because it was the furthest away from the fog signal. And then the assistant was closest to it. And notice there's a connection between the house and the tower. And there's also little buildings that were fix-it places because they had a lot to fix back then. And down at the bottom right, it grew up. We talked about how they raised the tower 14 feet. Well, they raised the roof of the house, and they needed to do that. They didn't know at the time, but in the early 20s, late 1920s and the early 30s, there were 3 keepers, a principal keeper, a first assistant keeper, and a second assistant keeper, and 19 kids on a 1.5-acre island with just 3 outhouses and no running water, just hand pumps from what comes into the cistern. Wow. So that's the grow-up.
You didn't have to worry about taking a bath except for every Saturday night.
And see what looks like a doghouse? Well, one of the things is at this time, the way that the fog signal was steam, and they needed 2 things to fire off that fog signal. One was water, and the second was coal. So at this time, they were getting 4,000 tons of coal a year, 2 in the spring, 2 in the fall. And they would get it on the west end of the island and lug it down to the east. And the water, that cistern building that we mentioned earlier, that was built to collect enough water to keep the fog signal going. And the other cisterns that were in the house, they couldn't, when that water ran low, they couldn't take it out of the big cistern. So they were always looking for potable water, and that was one of the ethics. They tried to get a well, but it was very brackish. It wasn't good to drink, nor was it good for machinery as a backup for water. And here's a picture of 1937 with Edward Snow making a drop of to the people below. And next.
Going to point out your outhouse.
Oh, Jay wanted to point out the outhouse. Okay, Jay.
When Sally first saw this building, she said, an outhouse with a window? What it really was is there was a light on this side of it that was a range light to keep you off of Toddy Rocks, one of the shallows as you go in there in Tasket Road toward Hobart.
Yeah, when you come out of it, was the coming out of the Hellgut. And then time goes on. So now we're into the 1940s. And if you notice, the big house is still there. And we have the current keeper's house and the boathouse, the tower. And we have a pier there. The bottom picture is showing we used to have 2 piers. And the reason for that is the prevailing wind was from the west. So sometimes it was hard to land on the island with seas and wind like that. By building those 2 piers, it was safe water that they could go into. And as you can see, there's a pleasure boat. There's probably kids playing in one of the dinghies.
And those of us that go out there now, this is a sheet pile pier, and now there's just a little bit of rusted remains of it.
All right, here comes the love story. Let's put you in the book. So Jay and I met in the Coast Guard Auxiliary in 1993. He was living down in Plymouth. He had a sailboat. And with the auxiliary, we take our pleasure boats, and we offer to the Coast Guard, and we can go out and do patrols to look for anything amiss, somebody that needs help, or some debris in the water that could disable the boat with its prop, or its engines, what have you. And so Jay said, hey, would you like to come down and do a patrol down in Plymouth? And I said, yes, sure. And then he said, how would you like to come up to Weymouth and go on a patrol with me up here? And he said, sure, fine. And one of the things that we would do when we patrolled, we would be in Quincy Bay, Hingham, Hull, out around Boston Light, down to Minus Light, out to the Graves. And when we were going by Boston Light one day, I said to Jay, when I grow up, I always wanted to get married at Boston Light. And Jay said,
let me know when.
and there was no response. I just registered that. Just about a year later, that was in August of 93. So in August of 94, we were putting around, going by Boston Light, and I said to Jay, is the offer still open? And he says,
yes.
So that was the proposal. In October of 1994, we got married on the island. And at that time, there were Coast Guard auxiliaries that would go out to the island to help out there. There were 3 active duty personnel. There'd be 1 had a week off, and then there'd be 2 on the island, so they'd keep on rotating through a 3-week cycle. But sometimes they went off to school, they were sick, there was funerals, they had vacations, and they looked for a warm body for a second person. And auxiliaries used to do that. But I was the wrong gender at the time. But as soon as we got married, we were able to go and do watches together out there. So, Jay says, okay, you only married me so you could stand a watch out there. I think there's a partial truth to that.
You can see it was a windy day, not from my head, but from second.
And so I want to turn back the clock. My dad was in the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and when I was a little kid, he was going to go out for a Saturday night, so the active duty, one of them could have a night off of the town in Hull. And so my mom would make like 6 cheese sandwiches, the cheese wrapped in the plastic, and then the white bread, butter. Send him off for 24 hours. And when he was in the auxiliary, he arranged for us to have a rendezvous to bring the families out. So we went out, anchored the boat, got in the rowboat, rowed to the beach. I looked up at the tower and said, Daddy, when I grow up, I want to get married there. And lo and behold, see, I seeded that. Be careful for what you wish for. And so that was an amazing thing that I was dreaming of. What it would be like to be a keeper at Boston Light. And now I know. So the lighthouse. Here's an area, and I took this picture. There was a tall ship race that was leaving the harbor, and it was a foggy day, and the Flying Santa helicopter and its pilot came and waited out. So we landed on the island, and then when it cleared and the race was going to start off of Nahant, he said, would you like to go see the start of the race? And I said, yes. Jay opted out, so the auxiliaries that was me on watch, we got to fly in the helicopter, and I took that picture. And what I love about it is it was low tide. you can see where you can walk across to Great Rooster Island, and you can see how little grass there is. So that's your 3 acres.
What's in the water on the right side?
Stone.
Yeah,
Starlight thing.
that's a reflection from something that, I think it was Audrey's laptop or something.
Oh, yes, that's what it was. It was, yes, it was her popsicle. And so here we're going into the tower. And the first place you get into is what we call the museum room. Once upon a time, this was the oil house. It's brick, and it used to, that's where.
One of the photos in the Holbrook Jewel album showed the oil tanks with the locks on them and the chimneys and stuff. I love that photo.
And so you enter in through the door into the museum room, take a hard right rudder, and you come into the tower itself. Many people come out to Boston Light, and they know it's 7.5 feet thick, and they want to see what that rubble stone is. And they walk in and they see the brick and go, what's that? What was happening was that the tower started to buckle, number one. And number two, they knew that a classical Fresnel lens from France was going to be coming to the island, and at the top at 4,000 pounds. So they reinforced it with the brick. So many visitors are disappointed that they walk in and see the brick and not the rubble stone. Then there's 76 spiral stairs, and it's a tight spiral. So you start feeling it in your calves about the 20th step. And if you notice, there are windows there. And as you go up, the window sills get narrower and narrower as it goes from the 7.5 feet up to the 2.5, which is the small one on the right-hand side. It looks like a little oven opener. That's only 2.5 feet. And then you go up a ladder, you go into the gear room.
And the other thing is, you see now the stairs are white with the black accents. Before we were open for tours, it was the battleship gray that paint was so available.
So this is the gear room that you're looking at. To the left is the ladder that goes up into the lantern room. And on the right, those 4,000 pounds of glass and brass gets rotated by 8 chariot wheels or truck wheels. 8. And then you have that huge gear, and the light was automated in 1998. And at that time, they were going to unman the island. The light would still flash, the fog signal would still do its fog signal thing. However, there wouldn't be a keeper on the island. And Boston Light was slated to be the last manned Coast Guard light station in the country because it was the first established light station in colonial America. So since 1998, that lens has been rotating 24 hours, 7 days a week, for 52 weeks out of the year. And when I say that, there's some glitches with it. It seems to be not functioning very well lately. We have 19th century technology with 21st century technology. Yeah, I could see where there's going to be some hiccups with that. But that's how it rotates with I think it's a 1/2 motor.
1/2 horsepower electric motor that we pretty sure was installed in the 60s to replace a clockwork mechanism with a big weight. It's like a good old grandfather clock.
And then, next. This is the lantern room itself. This is what they raised 14 feet. And I love the picture on the left. Doesn't it look like it's watching? The harbor is safe. And on the right, we're seeing 3 panels. There's 12 panels with 12 bullseyes. And when the light, do you see the light in the middle? When it's right in the middle of the bullseye, that's what you see as a flash. And when it's not in the middle, there's darkness. When you're close up to the light, When you're on the island or on a boat and just off the shore, you can see 12 rays coming out. And it's absolutely awesome. And for me, when I'm on the island and those rays, they drop down to the sea, I feel so protected that nothing could harm me while I'm out there. This is, it's artwork. Can you even see the rainbow colors on the right-hand one near the top? You'll get rainbow.
I could spend a half an hour easily talking about Fresnel and what he came up with to do this, because, you know, we just think, oh, it's glass. Well, glass in the early 19th century wasn't anything like today's glass.
And this is, if you're down in the lantern gear room and you look up at the lantern, that's what you see. You can't see all 360 of the lenses, but you can, 336 lenses, but isn't that awesome? And if you're seeing two light bulbs, that's because there are two. There's a backup, so if one burns out, the other one automatically flips in.
And that's one of the hiccups, because if one of them burns out, it's supposed to ratchet around 180 degrees, and sometimes it don't
Yeah,
work.
it hasn't been working that well. Now we're to the 21st century, and this is when Sally gets her boat.
Can we get a used boat for a couple of years?
What happened is that Jay and I did 5 years of research on Boston Light. And we had some friends that said, hey, you gotta sandwich that between two covers. And we did. It's on the back table. And when the Park Service was putting together a program to start bringing tours out to Boston Light, they asked the Coast Guard, hey, do you have any history of Boston Light? And they said, oh, you've got to talk to Sally. And they proclaimed the historian of Boston Light at that time, in 1999. Alrighty, so we offered up drafts of our book because it hadn't been printed yet. And so they said, well, Sally, do you think you could put a historical interpreter guide together for us? And I said, yeah, sure. And then the Coast Guard side, so that was the Park Service, the Coast Guard said, hey, Sally, we'd like to have a formal training of assistant keepers from the auxiliary side. And you and Jay have been doing this since '94. Could you write a manual on it? And I said, yeah, sure. And from that point on, and by 2000, we formalized all of this, and we started the Boston Light Augmentation Program, and that's what it was called. And I recruited, trained, and scheduled about 80 auxiliarists for the season every year. So that was a big hunk of my job right there. But I was, that was as a volunteer. And then we had 9/11. And at that time, there were 3 active duty that were assigned to Boston Light. And they were removed from the island. The island was shut down because everything had to shut down. After a few days, the Park Service was opening their parks again and was looking to see if they could give tours back at Boston Light. Well, the active duty was still in Boston, and they said, hey, Sally, do you think that you could open the island and, you know, have your assistant keepers out there? I said, yeah, sure. And we did that. And we did it so well, the Coast Guard scratched their head and said, why do we have active duty out at the island? What if we got a civilian keeper and then have the auxiliarist do, support the watches? And that's what they did. They went to Congress and asked if they could civilianize the position, and they said yes. So when we bought the boat in 2000, it was for 2 years. That was the deal. Because as a volunteer in the auxiliary, it was a 2-year appointment. We are on our 23rd year. And so...
My sailboat was a lawn ornament, so I finally wiped my eyes and got rid of it.
So this is the SBLS, Sally's Boston Light Shuttle. And you'll see that we have an auxiliary decal on the windshield, and then we have, it looks like we're a hot dog stand, but it says U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary Patrol. And this is where I get, am I getting paid for this, or am I volunteer? I'm 20 years later, I'm still trying to figure that out. And we get to the island, and there's no pier. So we have to come up to the faces of the pier to get ourselves and whatever gear that we need to have on the island.
And you can see the size of the fenders we have for a 20-foot center console.
And one of the things I did every year is, I love marigolds, and had a marigold garden. And we had to hand these up the ladders, so we lost a few in the water.
Took a while before we got a system down.
It was a water blessing with flowers. And then the Park Service, wanting to have the tours at Boston Light, they had to come up with the safe transfer of personnel. They couldn't be coming up and down the ladder. So they built this $1.8 million dock system where we have the pilings with a 50-foot dock and a 50-foot gangway that's out to the island for 16 weeks out of the summer. And how do we get our water? We can't drink that water that's in the cisterns, the yucky pooey. And we drive to Easton and get the water at Simpson Springs. And then we bring it to the marina. We put it on the boat. We bring the boat up to Boston Light. We unload the boat. And then we lug all the bottles into the cellar of the keeper's house. So when assistant keepers were signing up to do duty, they'd say, when are you going to be doing a water transfer? And they would choose another set of dates.
And we would look for a high tide to do the work. Save that 9.5-foot vertical rise.
And this is one of my favorite pictures. You have the boathouse on the right, the keeper's house on the left, and the tower front and center. And people say, well, what's it like inside the keeper's house? It's very, very nice. That's the kitchen that you're looking at, and you can see the tower. When the Park Service brought out the tours, the visitors could go up to the top of the tower and to literally go into the lantern room. So before they went around the island, they'd go to the boathouse for welcoming. And I'd always say, don't touch the lens because you have oils on your fingers, and if you touch the glass and then the sun heats it up, it could cause it to crack, bubble, and do other not nice things. And so I would sit at that table with binoculars and watch the visitors touch the lens.
Tell them something else where to put their hand.
Oh yes, so in the boathouse, what I would say, if you don't know what to do with your hands, put them in your pockets. If you don't have pockets, pretend you do. And then I would sit at the kitchen table with binoculars. There was one person, red and white striped shirt, touched that sucker at least 10 times. I had to hold my tongue. I had a walkie-talkie so I could talk to the ranger, but if I did that, the other interpreters had walkie-talkies. So
He's lucky I didn't see it, because I wouldn't have kept my mouth shut.
But I mean, how can you get any better than this? And this is the living room, very comfortable, and look at that, another view of the light. And then the front windows are facing hall. And during the wintertime, we had a Christmas tree, Father Santa would come, and we'd have hot chocolate and cookies. And the staircase, I love the staircase in the house. It's the same way as going up into a lighthouse.
When the lighthouse board came up with something that worked, they kept, like a cookie cutter, using it again and again. If you look at one of the most photographed ones up in Maine, Double Light, it's the same house, a little different gingerbread work, but the same house, might be flipped.
And there's my marigold garden. And then to the right, we show again the entrance to the tower. And look at where the lighthouse just sits. It just sits right at the end of that precipice. And with erosion and things like that, I hope it gets to stay for a while more. And then we get into the public tours. So what did Sally do as a volunteer? Recruiting for historical interpreters. And it was with the Rangers, the auxiliaries, and there's also an organization called the Friends of Boston Harbor Islands. Have you heard of that? Because we have many people on the South Shore that are members of that. So we were in 3 different kind of uniforms.
You haven't told them what you did before you became a keeper.
What do you teach?
Professor, yeah.
All right. What did
I
I
mean,
do?
she's doing the training. Well, what rights she got to do all this training? Well,
Because I was a college professor at Perry College, teaching teachers how to teach. That's what I did. And one of the courses that I taught was curriculum development. That was like my favorite. And so that's why writing comes easy to me, and writing manuals, it was an easy thing to do. It was not a hardship. And how did they get to the island? There's another partner, a small P. They don't own any of the property, but because they are part of the harbor, it's UMass Boston. And their boat got the contract to bring the visitors up to the island. The boat can carry 110 people, but because the island is so small, it's limited to 50. And here the boat is, and notice how it's backing up to the dock. So it really can't stay there. This was a calm day. Usually it's rough out there, and the boat just couldn't stay tied up. So they drop the 50 people off, go away, and come back an hour and a half and pick them up. And they would come up the walkway, and there's the ranger guiding them into the boathouse. And this is their welcoming, where they get the spiel about what to do with their hands. And if you notice, we have a white rope on the bottom picture, bottom left. Anything behind that, that was our workspace. And then the front part is the business space. And it's a shade area. There's no shade on the island, there's no trees. So come August, it can be really, really hot out there, and the boathouse would be a way to get some respite from it. And then they leave the boathouse. We have a beach at high tide, there's not much of it there. But mid-tide and low tide, the tidal pools start being visible. And the kids love to go down and play with that. And they head for the tower for their turn. We could take 8 people at a time up there. We'd have 6 groups, 15 minutes up, 15 minutes down, and back on the boat. We could bring picnic lunches, which was the prior picture, and then we hike them back down to the boat.
we're not kidding about it being windy out there.
And then we always get visitors, kayakers, by the dozen. And this is a cistern. Was explaining before for the coal burning fog signal. This is the cistern.
We like to call
22,000
this
gallons.
20,000 gallon cement ponds for those that like watching the Beverly Hillbillies.
And if you notice, there's a cool sand filter type thing. If you look to the right bottom right, you'll see some yellow hoses. Those are fire hoses that would hook up to that, put it on backwash, and we could pump water down to the keeper's house in about 20 minutes. Before we got that, it would take us like 6 hours to transfer.
We take a sump pump with a garden hose and wait, and wait.
But the whole purpose of that, how big that building was, so that it could maximize the amount of water it could take.
This gutter went this way, along the side of the building, came in here, and the tank itself was enough so that the gutter from the north side would drop right in.
And the calm before the storm. This is where you gotta get the hang here. Beautiful. Ah, look at this. The Coast Guard brought me out in the wintertime. No go on this one, folks. A washing machine off the pier. Go back when your boat is with you. I was on the island for this storm, and as you can see, we got hammered. This was in 2013. At that time, we were able to do winter watches when there was a possibility of having like 10 days of good weather. If there was any chance of a storm, they wouldn't let us go out there. Well, we were out there.
Well, this is New England, and sometimes weather is local.
So the auxiliary that was out with me, her name was Audrey, and we were getting hammered. We had 19, 20-foot seas out there. bang in the back of the house, so when I was laying on the bed at night, I felt like I was on a vibrator bed. It was really cool. I was not afraid. So Audie and I are running window to window taking pictures, and then we were delayed coming off the island by 3 days. So when I got home, I downloaded photos, sent them to the Coast Guard, and they said, "Oh, what were you doing out there?" And I said, well, it was only going to be a nor'easter, 40, 45 knots, maybe, 6, 7 foot seas, no biggie. And then they said, oh, it's a full-blown blizzard. And the Coast Guard said they'd come and get us. They'd be there in like 15 minutes. Well, in the wintertime, you can't leave food on the house. The critters are going to get in, the rats and stuff like that. So we'd have to clean out the refrigerator, pack everything up, take it off the island. That would take us about 2 hours. So we said, no, thank you. Well, that's what did it for us. And after that, I could do no more winter watches. So that's why I say it's 5.5 months a year that I was living out there. And because of the storm that we had in the winter, January and March of 2018, the damage has still not been mitigated yet. So this was the last summer that I lived on the island. And I had a hunch about that, and I spent as much time as I could out there. I spent 7 consecutive weeks without going home. When I needed to go to Boston to check my Coast Guard emails, Jay would come out with the boat, bring me into Coast Guard base, and bring me back to the island. So that was my last hurrah. But if you notice that the storm took out the wooden walkway, and it was pushed up against the boathouse, rocks strewn everywhere, and shingles gone. And auxiliaries, we have a lot of talented auxiliaries. In this particular one, Jim, likes to do shingles. So he was re-shingling the side of the boat. And this looked like a Cookie Monster. This is on the east side of the house, you see the walkway. We just took a whole chunk of land with it. Gone, forever. And when auxiliaries started coming out in the spring and summer, all we did was pitch walks. The 2 sitting closest to us, they were doing pitching contests. Who could pitch the furthest?
We came up from Florida to do this.
And 21st century technology. People say, do you still need aids to navigation? Do you still need lighthouses? Well, this happens every summer.
This guy must have been using a Parks map.
Yeah. This is the spit between the Little Brewster and Great Brewster. And it was a tour day. And we had a lot of staff on board. And we saw this sailboat coming in on us. And we're jumping up and down, yelling, blowing whistles. The next thing we hear was a crunch. They were there until 1 o'clock in the morning. So I was on watch with another auxiliarist, and we took turns 1 hour on, 1 hour off with binoculars and letting Station Point Holiday know that there's people still on the boat. There's lights there. We can see them moving around. When they got off, Sea Tow came, the commercial one, and towed them into Boston. If they took on any water, it was being pumped out by the towboat. We talked about the backup lights, and we have a 13,000-foot extension cord from the town of Hull. You know where the windmill is? And then on the inside of the boathouse, where the Hull Lifesaving Museum has a rowing program. Well, right next to that boathouse on the right-hand side is a transformer for our electricity to Boston Light. So it goes around through Hull Dock, out to Boston Light, 13,000 feet. And sometimes there's a hiccup. Hull loses electricity, we do. So we have a little solar panel that will run the backup lights, not the big one at the top of the tower, and the fog signal. And the fog signal used to have a device on it that if it was a 1/4 mile visibility or less, it would automatically go on. The Mariner does that now. Any of you have boats and you're out on the water, for Boston Light, go on to 83 Alpha, click the mic 5 or more times, and you'll activate the fog signal. And that's also with Minus and Grace Light. They're all done by the boater. And that's why we don't hear the fog signal very often, because many don't know that. And with cell phones now, I know some people go out on the boats without even a VHF marine radio, so they wouldn't be able to do that. And here's what it looks like at night with the backup lights. And notice it pulled down the shades so that the light does not just sit on the lens when it's not rotating.
We unroll, I said unfurl, we unroll the shades and put them up on the hangers, because you wouldn't want to try to get the strings to work. That's about 9 feet that you got there.
And a lighthouse story is not finished until we talk about the mascot for the Coast Guard, which is the black lab. And Sandy was the last official Coast Guard lighthouse dog in the country. Isn't he sweet?
You want to tell them where he started off this life?
You know where he started off in life? At the Scituate Coast Guard Station here in town. And when they moved to where is now the fisheries building, that was the Coast Guard Station. And they moved to the downtown parking lot for prefab ranch house. And so they couldn't keep the dog. And there's a Coast Guard radio station in Scituate as well. And I think that's in Marshfield. So Sandy went there. And that went day duty. And they said, we can't have a dog here. They brought it into Boston, to the Coast Guard base, and said, get that dog out of here. So they called up to the keeper of Boston Light, his name was Scott, and said, hey Scott, how would you like a black lab dog? And he said, you know what? I've been thinking about wanting a dog out here. So Sandy got to come out to the island, and he loved it because he didn't have to be on a leash. He had the run of the island. And then bringing closure to the last man or woman, Coast Guard Light Station in the United States, 1716 to 2023. So this is where you need to get the hanky out. After that 2018 storm, and the Coast Guard's main financing money comes to maintain the light at the top of the tower and the fog signal, not the buildings, not the grounds. And the Coast Guard has attempted many times to close down Boston Light, either shutter it, transfer it, what have you. So this is the umpteenth time that this is happening. Back in 2000, Senator Kennedy created a law for the Lighthouse Preservation Act of 2000. The purpose of that is because the Coast Guard, many of the lighthouses are national landmarks, and they can't maintain them. They don't have the expertise to maintain these historic sites. So the thought was, start divesting them and have them go into entities that know how to take care of them. And the Coast Guard can still maintain the light at the top of the fog signal if they so want to do that. Well, Boston Light was always on the bottom of the list, but after the storm, it went to the top. And so right now, it is in process to find a new entity, a new owner for Boston Light. It typically takes 2 to 5 years because of COVID. We're already 3.5 years into this. Now, one of the stories I forgot to tell you, when I got hired, it was in 2003, yes. And it was going to be a temp job. And the interview was not only with the Coast Guard, but with the Park Service. Because I was going to be on the payroll for 18 months to 2 years. And then I was going to go, if I wanted to, on the payroll for the park and be a ranger. And they said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. The transfer was supposed to take place in July, August 2004. At the last moment, it fell through. To this day, I don't know what the politics behind that was. It didn't happen. So I say I have the longest federal temp job in the country. This is my 20th year, waiting for a transfer to happen. So many people that know that I'm going to be retiring at the end of this year, and that Boston Light is finding a new owner, that, am I sad, and do I want to keep the job? Should the Coast Guard, really keep this? Well, in my heart of hearts, because it's a historic landmark, it belongs to an entity that can take care of it in the means that it deserves. It's not getting the care and love and appreciation that it needs. So I've always been behind that. And now that we have a transfer that's been stalled because of the COVID, I thought that this would be over by now and that I would be retired. So what's happening is I'm putting out to the ethers that the transfer is going to take place in 2023, the same year I retire. So the announcement will be, this job, the pre-keeper's job is going away. Okay, I'm the last. So even if this whole transfer detains into another 2 years or so, it's an unmanned island, and I win the Koopy doll for being the last keeper of the last manned Coast Guard light station in the country. And it is such an honor. And being the first woman keeper, so I'm the first and the last. And then, I love this picture, Worthy Lake. These are his relatives. He's the one that drowned 2.5 years into service. And the family came out. Those are their descendants. And then with me for last. And this is sunrise. Isn't that gorgeous? Sunset. And this is the lake. All 12 beams. So it's just awesome being on the island and looking up at it. It's I go into a different space and time when I do that. And that's it. So could have a light come up and we'll take some questions. And I want to point out Dolly. Did we all Dolly stand up?
I'm Dolly.
Dolly and I, we've been friends for many, many years. And when I was a kid, my dad was a very good friend of Edward Snowman. And we had just about every single book your dad wrote down in our cellar. And unfortunately, when my mom was cleaning out the cellar after us three girls, flew the coop, she disposed of them. And then we did research for our book in the back. Would you believe that we paid as much as $230 for one of the books? Isn't that amazing? And the other thing, Jake loves to do genealogy, and
Had to dig back a little bit, but they're related.
But we're related. She's Snow, I'm Snowman, and a lot of people think that I'm Snow.
It's funny, somebody brought our attention to the Smithsonian little YouTube clip, and they gave her credit as Keeper Snowden.
Yeah, a DEN. But I think the other thing that's interesting is Dolly and I were born the same year. Isn't that amazing?
And she's also related to Len. The Bicknell is one of the original settlers of Weymouth, and so they're related too.
So very, very interesting. So are there any questions? Is this one of them? I can do this too, so that you know.
Okay, so I wanted to ask about the light sources for the lamp over
You have to eat them. Ooh.
tasty. I wanted to ask about the light sources for the lamp over the years. Like, was it an oil lamp? Is it LED now? Like inside the functional lens?
I can deal with that. There's a manufacturer of plastic lenses that back in the VHF time made a little lesson, 10-minute clip, and now you can get it in CD. But of course, we started off with candles, And then we went to oil, fish oil, whale oil, and there was also something called cazola oil, which was rapeseed cut. And then prior to the Fresnel lens being put in, the best widget was a parabolic reflector. Think classic headlight lens or a flashlight. And one of the problems with that was to take and get the curvature right, so it went out in the right direction. When they did the inspections, some of them were bad. The other thing was, with the base metal, what would you do to make it reflective? Well, you'd put nickel or silver coatings on, you wouldn't make it thick, and the keeper would end up wiping that off. Now, each one of those reflectors had to have a light source in front of it. And there was a guy by the name of Argon that invented it. And if you look at your oil lamps that you see at the antique store, most of them have flat wicks. Aren't you glad you asked the question? one of the developments they came up with was a circular wick, so the air could come in behind it as well, so it was brighter for the lesser fuel. And I mentioned briefly about the quality of the glass back in the early 19th century. They actually tried putting a magnifying glass in front of one of those parabolic reflectors. The impurities were so bad that they just said, take it away. It doesn't make it any better. So what Fresnel did, he was, by the way, he was one of Napoleon's engineers, and he used to do road work and he got sickly. But what he did is he kept the thickness down, and then he got his mathematics table out, and the lens, the angles of the light got bent through the glass to come out horizontally. To me, it's just fascinating.
Well, the other thing about Fresnel is that he was hired to come up with effective street lights in Paris. And he came up with the Fresnel lens. Amazing. Aren't you glad you asked?
Well, yeah, I'm curious about like the distance that you can see those over the years, like from candle to, you know.
When, in the 1960s, it was seen to 16 nautical miles. So that 1,000 watt lamp, that blew it up. They didn't have that wattage before that, so it was less visibility.
In the base of the tower, in the museum room, they had a bunch of different lamps. Some of them looked like the big bulbs, the big screw-in bulbs. And you know, they eventually came up with 1,000 watt lamps. And that's one of the difficulties now is, you know, it's supply and demand. Well, who wants 1,000 watt lamp? You don't need 1,000 watt lamp for 99% of the time, so the cost of those 1,000 watt lamps is really making Coast Guard scratch their head.
They told me that they're $800, and it's only this big. And hold on, I just had one other thought. Did it fly through my head? Yes, it did. Yes, sir.
The distance is achieved by the oculus. What do the figs do?
When you looked at that picture, the lens,
is what gives you the
when
distance.
you saw the bullseye, which
Yeah.
magnified.
Yeah.
The ones above that, they bend it over. And the problem was once you got up, and all the things I can remember, at 57 degrees, you can't just get it to bend. So if you look quickly at those upper ones, they look like triangles. But they're very sophisticated. The light goes in, bent, reflects off, bends, and reflects out to go horizontally. So there's very touchy little technical.
Sorry, I asked.
So you got to remember
that.
in the 1820s we had, still in the 1850s, you had a fuel. Whale oil, by the time this went in, it was probably cazola oil. And so you had to take and have a place for the heat to escape. So when you look at that, you basically get as much light out of the light source as possible.
It was refraction and reflection,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Amazing technology, and some of them, they'd have the back of them would be glass and it would reflect from the light source and help push it out and amplify it.
Didn't they get soot and stuff in them when they were burning the?
Yeah.
Speak up,
Yeah.
Jay.
It's the question is, you know, I was talking about the keepers polishing the covering off. Well, if you had a lamp, you had to, they call them wickies, you had to trim the wick properly. If you didn't trim the wick, or if there was a storm or something, all that soot and oil and everything would get over the back of the parabolic reflector, get on the lantern glass, you know.
And I have an idea. Those who want to talk more about the Fresnel lens, why don't we talk afterwards and we'll take other questions? Going once, going twice. Yes.
What about with like human waste on island today? Is it composting toilets or how do you deal with what's
The question was, what do we do with the poop? Actually, in 1960, they got rid of the outhouses, and we got into a plumbing. And what we have out there now is our own sewage treatment plant. The separate sewage treatment plant, and that's one of the reasons that Sally doesn't get to stay out there, is because of all the difficulties involved with keeping a sewage treatment plant going.
I think that's interesting because you asked because I thought the presentation was too long, so I took some slides out, and one of them was the treatment plant and cleaning it. The one thing that I didn't finish telling the story about, once a transfer takes place to the island, whoever gets it, they are now going to be involved in the Boston Harbor Islands National State Park. And that law says that Boston Light has to be open to the public for at least seasonally. And so people say, well, when can we go out to Boston Light again? Will we ever be able to do it again? Yes, we just don't know when that is. But it will be open because it's part of the park. The owner will have to do that.
And an interesting addition to that, the sewage treatment plant has been closed down, deactivated, it's disconnected, so it can't work. But every month, Sally has to.
Oh, I still have to put a monthly report in to the EPA. Every month, since 2018 when it was shut down. Is there a question, ma'am?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you still see yourself teaching the history of this in a different capacity or even back out?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because I'm already being booked for speaking in 2024 when I'm not going to be the keeper. And it hit me. I didn't realize that I was booking them. Go, wait a minute, I'm not in the payroll anymore. You know, can I do this? And I said, of course I can. How many people leave the military and go off and do lectures and write books and stories and things like that? But as I said, things are just going so rapidly right now. I haven't even really given that a thought. So thank you for bringing that up because I do have to think about that. The thing is, it's an age thing too. I'm 72, so I don't have to go out and look for another career. But definitely, I love writing, and a number of people have suggested that I write memoirs, and I'm thinking of doing that.
What happened to the big house that was there?
Question is, what happened to the big duplex house? Well, the Coast Guard turned it into what they called a stag station. They got the families off. They had this 100-year-old building with plaster falling down, rat infested. They didn't need it, so they burned it down on my birthday.
April 25th. And the way they did it, because it was a huge house, they cut the fire department from home, came out and they cut through the roof. And then they started the fire on the top floor. And it all fell down into the basement. It took 24 hours for it to burn. And they gave notifications so that people in Hull and Winthrop and Nahat wouldn't be calling saying, oh my God, Boston Light's burning down. It was deliberate. And there was a picture where it looked like a missile. It was an aids to navigation. It was red, colored on the lawn. That's a 1920 vintage buoy that's out in the harbor, the conical ones. And it's sitting where the house used to be.
When was that? What year?
That it burned down?
I think it was
1960.
around 29. There's a book written by the son of the light keeper, and he happened to get a picture of it when it was burning. But that was one of the old Chesapeake, I call it Chesapeake Bay type lighthouses. It was on the cast iron legs, and the keeper was out there with a torch on a windy day.
And you know what? They gave him another lighthouse. He didn't get fired.
We had a question in the back.
Yeah, did you say they're waiting for someone to buy
The question is, go ahead.
This is my baby legs, okay? Okay, so what's the way that the transfer of a lighthouse takes place by the Lighthouse Preservation Act of 2000. How that works is it first goes to another federal agency. If they don't want it, it then gets offered to the state. If the state doesn't want it, it goes to a municipality. If the municipality doesn't want it, it then goes to a 501c3 non-for-profit. If that doesn't happen, then it goes to the auction block. That is the last dire strait. And in my heart of heart, because Boston Light is the first established light station in colonial America, I just don't see it being auctioned off.
And our neighbor Graves Light has no interest in it.
Dave Waller bought his lighthouse for just a short of $1 million, and he's put at least another 1.5 million into it. So does that answer your question in a roundabout way?
it? It did, I just was wondering, why would anyone want to buy it? I mean,
If Sally had the pockets,
well, I can understand someone wanting to buy it for historic purposes. They would have to be pretty well.
But the reason for buying it, why on my radar, I don't see that. Because whoever gets it needs to allow for the Park Service to bring tours onto the island. So it's going to have to be a very special individual who would buy that and let the Park Service be walking around and using the bathroom facilities or whatever that's going to take. And I think in my heart of hearts, I think that if you can go to an entity that knows how to take care of a historic landmark like Boston Light, where the Coast Guard, that's not their job. And people are very upset that the Coast Guard doesn't want it. It isn't that the Coast Guard doesn't want it. It's just that they know they can't maintain it to the national standards of a historic landmark. We fail on a number of levels.
before we get into this position about turning it into the Lighthouse Preservation Act project, we'd look at Sally put up for what she'd want in the budget, and it'd go in the budget. And you'd look, well, we'll spend a lot of money out at Boston Light, or we'll keep Station Point Allen up and running, or keep Scituate Station up seasonally. Even for us, with our love of Boston Light, it was a no-brainer.
So that's the end of the beginning. A new owner for Boston Light, and let me see what I'm going to step into next. A college professor, come lighthouse keeper, maintenance on the island, facilitator. I mean, it's like, wow, what next? We'll see. Thank you so much.